Hello everybody, and welcome back. So far, we've been working on recreating the old Super Mario Brothers game. And at this point, we have created a ground, which doesn't currently move, and we have the character on it that can move left or right. And let's see. We have him facing left or right. We can make him jump. We can make him land on a bad guy, and the bad guy shoots off the screen. Then the bad guy comes back. If we miss him, if we don't jump, then our character turns small. And of course, next time he gets hit when he's small, you would have him be killed, and that would lose a life. But all of this has been done so far in the previous sections. And now we're going to start a different section for a little while. And I'm going to show you how to animate the ground. And the reason we're going to do a different section is this is something we do a lot of times in programming. We compartmentalize, we break things down, and that way I don't have to worry about all of this code and what if I mess something up, because I could literally accidentally mess something up and now everything else I've done doesn't work. So instead, I'm going to start a new one. I'm going to figure out the ground code, and then I'm going to come back and I can just add it into this one. And a lot of times it's a lot easier that way, because when you start doing things, you don't have to worry about trying to find it and all that, because it's all right there. So let's go start a new project. And I'm going to call this, start a new project. I'm going to call this screen animation. And I've actually already got one called that, so I'm going to call this screen animation 2. And the whole point of this one is just to figure out how to get the screen working properly. So to do so, I'm going to start by adding a canvas, because everything has to be on a canvas. So you can never have things not on a canvas in the apps like this that we're doing. And for now, I'm going to tell it that my height is fill screen and the width is fill screen. And I say for now because we're actually going to pull off a few other tricks that we haven't done before. So I'm going to add 3 sprites for now. I'm going to add one up here a little bit, and I'm just going to call this one Mario. I'm not going to worry about, oops, I call that one Mario. That's okay, because I'm not even doing anything with it. All I'm going to do with this one is add a picture of Mario, just so I know where my screen is. So we've already uploaded them before, so any of them will work. I just need one where I can use it to show my screen. And then I'm going to add 2 down here at the bottom. And the reason I'm doing 2 of them is because, let me first explain to you how backgrounds work. Let me get out of here for a second. And let me go into Paint. Okay, let me explain how backgrounds work. Let's say you have your screen, and this is the screen that we've been using this whole time, right? Well, if I can get a hold of it. Why is it not letting me grab it? That's so weird. Okay, that was weird. So this is the screen that we've been using the whole time. And I'm just going to, well, I told it to let me copy. So I'm just going to copy this and show you what we're going to do. I'm going to create my canvas to be about 3 times as wide as my screen. And I actually have a really good reason for doing so. So this is going to be my screen from here to here. And for argument's sake right now, let me just put in screen, because I'm going to leave this up. We're going to use it. For argument's sake, let's say my screen is 200 pixels. And now my canvas is this wide. It's from there to there, which means that if my canvas is 3 times as big as my screen, and my screen is 200 pixels, then my canvas is now going to be 600 pixels. And in a perfect world, this is exactly how it would work. Although we're going to find out that we're going to have a slight issue with this that we're going to have to overcome. Which, don't worry, I'll walk you through it. So now my canvas is this entire thing. Now, for starters, this is a problem that you're going to run into. Right now, we have our little person set up, and let me just, for a short time sake, let me just come up and make him blue or something. Let's say this is my person. This is my Mario. And it's not, obviously, but you get the point. So this Mario is about right here on the screen right now. But remember, it keeps track of everything from the left screen, right? That's how we've always done it. But that's not entirely accurate. It's actually keeping track of everything from the left side of the canvas. So X is no longer 0 right here. X is now 0 way over here. So if Mario was at 149 for his X, he's now sitting over here off the screen. So you're going to have to add, if this is 200, then you're going to have to add 200. So now it would be 349, would put him back over here to where 149 was. Okay? And this is only mildly important right now, so don't worry too much about this. I just wanted you to know, because if you took one that was already existing and you made your screen 600 wide, you'd be like, why did my guy just disappear? Well, he didn't disappear. He's still the same distance from the edge. It's just we move the edge way over here. So now he's way over here where you don't see him. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so what we're going to do, let me go back into my bad guys here. And it was not in that one. Let me find my background. I think it's actually in Mario. Yeah, there we go. So what we're going to do here is, let me copy this. And I'm just going to paste it right on. And I got to make this way smaller so I can use it in my demonstration. What we're going to do is we're actually not just going to have one ground that sits here. We're going to have two. We're going to have one here and one that's sitting over here waiting. And now this is all based on the assumption that our Mario guy is going to be running to the left. And I'll explain that in just a minute. So the one that he's on, the one that we see, is going to be the one that's on the screen. As he's running to the left, this is going to be slowly moving to the right, like this. And the one that's over here is going to be slowly moving right behind it. And that's going to, they're going to overlap a little bit, and that's going to give it the appearance that it's one long screen. And when this one comes over here, as soon as it gets off the screen, we're going to reset and move it back over here. And by then, our second one is going to be here, and our first one will be here, and it'll just go moving in right behind that one. So as our second one is moving off the screen, this one would be filling up the screen. And right when it gets to the point where it's filled the screen, our second one would be moved off the screen, and it would reset, and now it would be back behind the first one, and they would just repeat that process. And that's why in these old games you could run left forever, and you keep seeing the same stuff in the ground. Like if you saw a little issue here where this part of the ground wasn't right, you would pass that every little bit. And the same exact thing is going to happen if we're running to the right. If we're facing this way over here and we're running, then the ground's just going to be moving to the left. And when this one gets off the screen, it would appear over here so that it could keep filling the screen like this. And that's all we're going to be doing. Now, I said theoretically because there is technically an issue with this, and we'll get to that in the code in just a minute. So let's do that. We already have our two sprites here, so let's upload. For the picture, I'm going to put choose file. I'm going to go into my Mario folder where I have these saved, and I'm going to choose background 01. Now I'm going to show you another trick that programmers often use. And first I'm going to set the width of this one to be about 200. Pixels. And I'm going to set the height to be, I don't know, for now let's say 20. I don't know how tall it's going to need to be. And that is nowhere near enough. So let's make that 100. And see how close that is. And sometimes that happens, you have to reset it because it didn't exactly look right. Okay, so now my ground would look about like that. So let's make it a little bigger. I want to make it about 200 tall. So it would actually, okay, I don't want it 200 tall. I liked 100. But let me show you what's happening. It's saying that it cannot make this little thin ground this tall while this part is only that wide, because it just wouldn't look right. So when I make this 300, that should make the tall one a little bigger too, because it tries to keep the proportions. And for some reason it's still not wanting to show up properly. Maybe if I make the height 200. I don't know. That still doesn't look exactly right to me. But that's okay. Sometimes you have to play around with these pictures a little bit. So now I'm going to give it a picture, and I'm going to make it Mario Background 1. And that makes it pretty big, because remember, this is huge. You saw it on the other one, it was really long. I want to change my width to about 250. And that's going to make it, it's not going to be this big. It's not going to appear this big. But for some reason, it has a little trouble with bigger pictures like this. So now I'm going to go into my other sprite, and let me rename this one. I'm going to call this one, I'm just going to call it something like Ground Sprite 01. I like putting 01 instead of just 1. And now I'm going to go into the other one, and I'm going to set the picture of it also. But what I've done is I've created a different background. I've called it Background Test. And the difference is my background test versus my background. I put these circles, these yellow circles, in my background test. And the reason I did this is, as one's moving in and the other's moving out, if there's a problem, I want to know which one the problem's with. And if they look identical, then you just have to kind of guess. But this way, if there's a gap before the circles, then I know that it's my circle one that's got the problem. So I can do it that way. So let me rename this one, and I'm just going to call it Ground Sprite 02. And let's just go right into the code. Oh, we need to add a clock. Let's go over to sensors and let's add a clock, because the clock keeps track of all that kind of stuff for us. And I'm going to set the interval for now to 100. And I'm going to turn off the timer. And I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to come back to drawing an animation, and I'm going to add another sprite. And this is going to be my start sprite. So I'm going to rename it Start Sprite. And I'm doing this because I'm going to add a picture, and I'm just going to upload a picture of something. I think I have one. Yeah, I've got one here that says start. So I'm just going to add that in. And this is just a simple little picture. And I'm going to make it about 50 by about 50. And all this is going to do is it's going to act like a button, but you can't have a button on the canvas. So I just basically created a button. When I click on this, I'm going to tell it to start moving everything. And that's also going to reset things. So if I have a problem and I click on this, it should put everything back exactly like it is now and then start going again. So let me correct his name because that's bothering me, even though it doesn't matter because I'm not going to use it. I'm a little OCD on that stuff, but that's okay. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go to the code. And the code's actually not that difficult. The first thing we want to do is see when our start sprite gets touched. And if it was an actual button, this would be a click. But since it's not a button, it's a sprite, we're going to say when it gets touched. That means when you click on it, because it's a picture. And when it gets clicked, I want to set both of my platforms, both of my ground sprites, both of my pieces of ground. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to get the first one. I'm going to get its X. Now I've already set how high I want it to be on the screen, so I don't really have to mess with that. But I'm gonna, because I like to be specific. And in programming, there are a lot of times when you could say, oh, well, I've already put it how high I want it, I'm just going to leave it there. But sometimes things happen that we don't really expect to happen. And in programming, it's a good idea if you specifically tell it these things, and that way you don't have to worry about how things might be different. Okay, so I'm going to make my canvas all the way out to here and all the way out to here with my code. And I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to come right in and tell it to set my canvas width. So I'm going to come all the way down to the width. I'm going to tell it to set the width. Now theoretically, the screens are, I've always been told the screens are 300 wide. Oops, so I would want to set this to 900. We're going to find out in just a minute that that was only a guess. Our screens are not actually 300 wide. And I'm going to duplicate and duplicate. And we're going to fix these now. This is where we're going to put our ground sprites to start. So I want the first one to be at 0. I want it to be all the way to the left. And let me do this. This is my X, Y. And it is 0, 0. This top left corner. The screen then, let me change this a little bit because I've now made it 900 instead of 600. So let me cut that out. And let me cut this out. And let's just go in and say now, we're going to say it's 300 and 300. Or, well, actually 900 for this one. So we're working on the assumption right now that our screen is exactly 300 wide. So 0, 0 would be here. So the start of the screen would be 0 down, but 300 across. So 300 and 0 would be our X and Y here. So I want my first one to be at 0, and I want my second X to be at 300. And although I don't have to specifically tell it to make my stuff all visible and all that stuff, I'm going to. Because over here in the clock, I told it my timer was not enabled. So I'm going to enable my timer. And I'm just going to set the timer enabled to true whenever they click that little sprite that starts everything. So now our timer is going to be going. Like I said, I don't have to set Mario's visible to true. I don't have to do all the other stuff, but I'm going to, just because I like to know for sure how things are going. So I'm going to come into my ground sprite 1, and I'm going to get the enabled. That's the second green one here. And I'm going to set the enabled to true. But that's not all I'm going to do. I'm also going to set the interval and the speed. So I'm just going to duplicate this and duplicate it again. And I'm going to set the interval So I don't need a true. And my interval is going to be a number. I'm going to set it to 100. Because remember, this is just like the clock. It's dealing in milliseconds. And I'm going to set my speed. I'm going to get a number for that. And I'm going to set my speed to be something like 5. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing, all three of these, for my other piece of ground. So I'm just going to duplicate each one of these. And by doing so, the only thing I have to change is right here. I got to change it to ground 2. And that's almost everything. All we need to do now, let's create a procedure. So let's go over here. And this is going to be my procedure. And I'm going to call it, let me rename it, scroll left to right. Because I want my ground moving from the left to the right. And I should have probably called it ground scroll left to right, but that's okay. And the reason I said left to right instead of just scroll is because we can also set it up to scroll the other direction. And I don't want to get them confused. So I'm going to tell it right off the bat, I want my platform Y. My platform's Y, that's its height. And I want it to be right at 300. So it's going to be that high, both of them. I'm going to set them off. I'm setting them up to be 300 to start. But I want my code to know that I want those sprites to be 300. So I'm going to come in here into the scroll. And I'm going to set my ground 1 Y to be 300. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for my ground 2. Because if right off the bat, I want it to be 300. And actually, it wouldn't be a bad idea to put it in here instead. That way it does it before it ever starts scrolling, versus it could be a different height and then start to scroll and have to move. So let's move those up there. And now, every time this gets called, because this is going to be in a clock, so every time this gets called, I want to move my ground for both my platform 1 and my platform 2 to the right by 10. So I'm going to get my ground, my platform, my ground 1. I'm going to get a plus sign. And I'm going to tell it that the ground 1 sprite is whatever the ground 1 sprite is. So whatever the X is. Because I'm wanting to do X now, not Y. So let me change that. So my new Y, my new X is going to be whatever my current X is plus 10. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other ground. So ground 2. So both of them are just going to find out what they are and add 10 to it. So remember, one would be exactly here, starting off. And it would move 10. So it would be about here to about here now. And the other one started off all the way over here at the edge. So it started off like this. And now instead it's going to be like this. Because it's going to buck right up to the other one. That's what we're going for. So I'm just going to keep adding 10 to both of them. To both of the X's. Until... So I need an if-then statement. So let's come up and get an if-then statement. Until my platform is more than pretty much off the screen. So at this point, let's say 600. So I need a math, because I need a condition with math. And I'm going to say until, if my platform X, so if my ground sprite 1 X is greater than, let's do greater than or equal to. That way if it's equal to, it still work. And let's just put in something like Oops, didn't actually mean to take that. I meant to copy it. Let's put another one in there. That was my ground 2. And let's put something like 600, just to test it out. So if my ground sprite 2 is moving to the right and it gets to 600, now this is important. Remember when a picture comes up, like here's my picture. This very top left corner is where it's measured. So which means that as it's moving to the right, 600 will be when that top left corner gets to 600. So not when any other part of it does. It's only this top left corner that it's measuring. So when it gets to greater than or equal to 600, and I'm just going to move it to 0. So I've already got it set up here. So I'm just going to grab my ground platform, my ground sprite 2, and set it to 0. And now that means that it's just moved off the screen. So I'm moving it back to 0. So I need to do an if statement for the other one to do the exact same thing. So I'm just going to copy this and duplicate it and plug it in. And I'm just going to change both of these to 1. So ground sprite 1. So now they should both keep moving to the right until one of them's greater than 600, and then it should move over to the left, and they should just keep running like a train back across. So I'm going to pause and start the emulator and show you. Okay, I got the emulator up, so let's give it a test and see what happens. So when I click this button, the ground should start moving, and see how I left it set up like this, but it should reset where one of them comes to the edge here, and the other one will be off the screen, and they'll both start moving. And that did not happen. Why did that not happen? Well, for starters, because this one is huge. So let's go ahead. We didn't resize them. So let's fix that real quick. I need to set my platform to be... See how it still says width is automatic for that one? For the other one, I set it to 250, but for this first one, I didn't. So let's change that and see what happens. And give it a second to refresh. And here we go. And that did not seem to work as well as we had hoped. And let me tell you why. Let me pause this real quick so I can refresh. Okay, so the reason this didn't work is, let me show you. By default, we have it set for the ground to have a heading, which is to the right, and already enabled. And let me unenable both of those. Then in our blocks, we told it to enable it, but we haven't actually told it what to do. This function here, this procedure tells it what to do, but we haven't created the clock function yet to complete or to repetitively call it. So let's go ahead and add that real quick. Let's call the clock timer, and we're just going to stick in the scroll procedure. And now let's double check and make sure our clock is set up at timer intervals of 100, and we need to enable our timer if we haven't already done so. Let me come up here and see. Yeah, clock 1 timer enable is true. So now it should work a little better. And of course it did that. So I'm going to have to reset it, and I'll be right back. Okay, I got it refreshed. Let's try this again. When I hit the start button, see how they both start moving now? And then they reset. And notice how there's a huge gap. So now we have to play around with these numbers and figure out why. Well, for starters, it's not centered. We have to come over to our canvas, and we have to tell it to center everything. So over here where it says alignment, we need to make sure it's centered. And next, we can go back to the blocks and double check everything. So, as is often the case in programming, we write our code, we think everything looks great, and then we test it, and stuff goes haywire, like this. This is not what we wanted at all. So why is that? And part of programming is figuring out what you did wrong and then trying to fix it. And what I did wrong was, let me come over to the designer. When you click on the screen, by default, it's aligned to the left, which means that my canvas started here and went 3, 6, 900 pixels, which means my first screen started here, my second screen started way over here, and my third screen is way over here. So the second one, as it moved, it was resetting and messing me up. So to fix that, I'm going to center the screen, and that centers the canvas on the screen. So now there's, as I described earlier, there's 300 in front, 300 behind it. This should have an almost immediate impact. See how it fixed a lot better? It's still not perfect, but it's a lot better. So now we have to go in and figure out, why are they so close together? Why are they not spread out more? And to do that, we're going to go into the code. And I'm going to get rid of a lot of the stuff that I don't think I need. I'm going to come into the designer first. Let me come to the canvas. And I'm going to tell the canvas to be 900 pixels. And I had told it that in the code, but that was okay. But what happens when I do it this way is, now it's going to be 900 pixels before the code ever starts running. And notice before I told you when you change the size that your stuff that's on the screen moves over. Well, now my Mario's gone and my start sprite's gone, because they are listed at x126. So I need to make that 426. I need to add 300 to it. And that should put it back about in the center of my screen. And then I'm going to do the same thing to Mario. 159 plus 300 would be 459. So now they were both sitting over here at 100 and something pixels from the edge. So now, I'm sure that messed up my emulator. Yep, let me pause and go back and reset everything. Oh, but before I do that, let me go back into the code. Now that I've told it my canvas is going to be that much, I'm going to get rid of that. So I don't need that in the code if I've already told it to do it. And I've got some other stuff here that I don't really need. I want my clock set. I don't really need to set my ground sprite enabled to true, because that should be already true by default. So really, I should be able to get rid of all of this except for these Y's, which just clicked back on. So I should be able to delete, 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 and plug these in. So now I'm down to just these things in my start button, and my start sprite. So what I'm going to do is, I've already told it in the code, or in the actual design, how wide I want my canvas to be. So now this should set the X to 0, which is to the left of the screen. My second one, X to 300, which should be right on the screen. Start my clock, and also make sure the Y's are at the right height. So let's see what that did. Let me restart my emulator again. Okay, the emulator's up, my code's cleaned out. Let's test it and see what happens. Okay, I now have my code, or have my pieces moving, and that's exactly how I want it to be, only I want it to not have this gap in between them. So to do that, let's resize those a little bit, because right now I've got them set for 250 pixels. Let's make it 300. And let's make the other one 300. And let's see what that does. Oops. Let's see if that fixes it. And of course I have to redo the emulator. I'll be right back. Okay, the emulator's back up again. Let's give this a try. So here goes my screen. That's where the first one ends and the second one begins. And that's pretty good. There's a little bit of a gap over here at the end. And it's not doing it the entire time, but it's doing it at the end of each one. And let's figure out why. Actually, I already know the answer, but I'm going to help you figure it out too. So what's happening is, see how there's a little bit of space at the end of our pictures here? So technically, my X is not right here. Technically, this is where my X is. So it's kind of jumping just a little bit. So there's a really easy way to fix this. I'm going to actually make my ground a little smaller and make them overlap a little more. So I've already created another file, which I'm going to upload now. And I called it background test 2. And background test 2, I'm going to put an image sprite over here, just like the others. And just like the others, I told it 300 pixels wide. So I'm going to change the name of it to ground sprite 3, because I already have 1 and 2. And I'm going to set the picture to be background test 2. And let me set the width to 300. So now what I'm going to do is, when I run this, I'm going to change just a little bit. Instead of it going all the way back to like the first one starting at 0, instead of the second one starting at 300, which is right here, which is putting just a little bit of a gap, I'm going to back that up a little, so it starts at about 225. And then instead of this third one starting way over here, I'm going to back it up a little so that it would start at, something around 450. And that's going to make them overlap more. So now that I've got it all done, let's just go in and add them in. And let me duplicate this one. This is going to be my X for my ground sprite 3 now. And I'm going to change this one to 225. That's going to be its starting place. And I'm going to change this one to 450. And now I need to come in and add another block here in my if-thens for that one. So let's change it to 3. Let's change this one to 3. And let's do one last thing. Let's change this from going to 600 to about 610. That way it should be off the screen. And I'm going to show you why in just a second. Let's go back to the designer for a second. If I move my Mario sprite all the way over to the right, it says my X is 590. Which means that my Mario sprite, the corner, has to move beyond the screen to get there. So right now it's at 609. It's not, this very edge is not 600. It's 609. So I told it when this gets to 610, which is just off the edge, to go ahead and reset, because it was resetting at 600, which is right here, like that. That's why you were seeing this white gap. When that corner got that close, it would disappear and it wouldn't be able to be used. It wouldn't be able to be seen. You'd see that white gap. So I just got a message that my emulator messed up. So let's go in one more time. I'm going to pause and fix that. Before I start it running, I want to do one more thing. I'm going to set my ground sprite for that one to be the height of 300, just like the others. That way it'll always be, right when I touch it, it'll go to the right height, and I don't have to worry about it changing. So, and since I let it come up before I made that little change, it messed up. So I'm going to pause again. Okay, we're back, and let's give this a test. And this one is now stopped. So what we need to do is figure out why this is happening. And again, I can already tell you. This is happening because I made these so wide now. So let's go back into the designer and let's click on the first one. Instead of it being 300 pixels, let's make it 250 for the width. And let's do the same for both of the others. It doesn't have to be as big because we're not doing as much with it. Since we have them overlapping, if you put all three of these together, that's going to be 750 pixels. So let's give that a test. Or let's go into the blocks first and make sure I didn't leave the part in there that set the width. Okay, and I forgot to mention it a while ago, but in the second ground level, I put the yellow circles so that you could tell which one that one was from the other one. I put red ones in the third one just so you could tell for sure where each one starts and stops when we run them. So let's get it going. And again, my red one is stopping here and not going. So I need to figure out why. The others seem to be resetting properly, but this one seems to not be. And it's possible that the answer lies in the setup. So let's go to the design screen and let's look at the design. It's set up to automatically head to the right, set up to head at 100 intervals, and it's enabled. These were all disabled by default. So let me disable the third one, and then over here we told it, oh, that's why. We told it here to take the second one and add 10 and take the third one and add 10, but we didn't tell it to do anything to the other one. So that one is not part right now of this happening. So let's add that, change those and put it in there. We went down and added this part, but without it being happening up here, that's not something that is going to be helpful for us. So let's change it again. Let's start over. And now you have the red blocks, the yellow, and it all looks totally seamless. There's a little bit of an indication between them where some of this, grass doesn't line up properly. But if you're just seeing it running like that, you wouldn't notice really if these red X's and yellow circles weren't here. So the last thing that you would do is go in and change those. So now that we've got it working, we've got the ground moving right, we look at number 1, and it's got the background that we want. It's got background 01. Then we look at number 2. Oops, I didn't click on number 2, did I? Click on number 2. It's got the test background. So let's change that back to the real background. And let's do the same for number 3 now. Instead of the test 2 background, let's change it to the real background. And now when we come back over, well, I'll be right back. Okay, so now that I put the background back in, it's a standard background for each one. When I hit run, you almost can't even tell where they overlap. I'm looking to try to see, but really, that just looks like ground. So you can imagine Mario over here. Don't tell me that's going to change things. Okay. You can imagine the animation we had of him now running facing to the left and the ground moving so it looks like he's actually running that way. And if we were doing this for real, we would also put a slow moving like mountain, something big like this, that just would slowly move like this, and that would give it the appearance of being way off into the distance. And then in the game, they would also take a few clouds and have them moving, a little faster, but sometimes they would move at little different speeds, just like regular clouds, and that would give them the appearance of being a lot closer because they're moving faster. You know how things way in the background move a lot slower. So we could add all of that in if we wanted. The awesome thing now is you know how to move the screen to the right and make it flawless. You could come into the code and you could recreate the scroll to the left, and all you have to change is right here, change these to minus signs, and right here change these to less thans and go a little to the left of the screen. And then you just have to reset each one to be to the right of the screen instead of to 0. So to like 600 or something like that. And if you do that, then the screen would move to the right. So you could set it up where, remember in our other game, we had it set up where we could keep track of which way Mario was facing. If he was facing left, it was a 1, and if he was facing right, it was a 2. Well, we could do that here. If it's a 1, call this clock, which runs scroll left, and when it changes to 2, call clock 2, which would run scroll to the, oh, this one's to the right, scroll to the left, which would make the screen run the other way. So now if he faces the other direction, the screen would be moving to the left. And you could take, now that you have this is a little bit of code. Now that you have this and you understand how it works and why it works, you could go back into the other game that we were working on and just add this ability in. You'd have to add one clock to control the ground, and you'd have to add the, the button, add this stuff into our start button, and add this stuff as its own procedure. And that's all it takes. So you can now take and add all this functionality to what we've already done. And I will create one that has them all just to show you. But for now, that's the end of this video. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back and watch some more videos, because I plan to make a lot more. And I will see you then. Bye.